Good morning. The AGR dues case in the Supreme Court took an interesting turn, with the Supreme Court wanting to know whether some of the telcos that have AGR dues and that have gone to the insolvency court, these are firms like Videocon, Aircel and Arcom. So the court wanted to know whether there was any mala fide in their going to the NCLT and whether this was essentially just a ploy for them not to pay the AGR dues. That's where the case began. What happened later on was quite interesting. Yesterday, the Supreme Court asked the Government of India what its plans were to actually collect the dues from these companies. If, after all, these companies were allowed to sell their spectrum, as in some cases is going to happen, if these companies are going to be allowed to sell their spectrum, the Supreme Court asked the government, how did it plan to collect its dues? The government in turn replied by saying that they would not allow the companies to sell their spectrum. Now this has three implications. For one, it becomes very difficult for these companies to actually get sold, for the insolvency proceedings to go on, and then banks will stand to lose a lot of money. So that's one level of problem. So in order for the government to prevent these companies from being liquidated, the government will now have to challenge the rulings of the NCLT and the NCLAT that allowed the spectrum to be sold. The government will have to challenge this in the Supreme Court. Now what's interesting is, from this case, it's early days yet, but it is very possible that the Supreme Court has finally got an inkling as to what will happen if Vodafone Idea is allowed to shut down. Vodafone Idea owes the government about 53,000 crore when it comes to the AGR dues. It owes about 1,75,000 crore when it comes to the deferred spectrum liabilities, and it owes primarily government-owned banks another 50,000 crore rupees here. So it is obviously possible that were Vodafone Idea to shut down, the government may be able to get its spectrum back. Of course, there will be a fight with the banks. But even if the government gets its spectrum back, it's unlikely that in today's times, when the telecom industry is in such deep trouble, it's unlikely that that would be worth anywhere near 175,000 crores. So essentially what it means is that the Supreme Court has probably got a bit of a reality check, and we don't know, it is difficult to presume what the Supreme Court will say, but this sort of indicates that the Supreme Court may be more willing now to actually give Vodafone Idea a longer period of time in which to pay its dues. Now the issue here is that even if the Supreme Court were to give Vodafone 10 to 15 or 20 years to pay the dues, Vodafone will still remain a pale shadow of itself, because one, it will need to raise a lot of money, and it may not have enough money to buy 5G spectrum and to do the kind of capex that it needs to do. In which case the government needs to step in and scrap the spectrum usage charges and the license fees. But that's something we've been saying for a very long time, and that's something that the government has done precious little about all these years. Apart from the problem of increasing infections, India is now the #1 country when it comes to the number of fresh cases every day. Apart from that, India has another problem, which is the spread of the disease away from urban India. Urban India now accounts for just 50% of the disease. The rest of it is accounted for by rural and semi-urban areas. And keep in mind that just 15-20 days ago, this share of rural and semi-urban India was half of what it is today. These are areas which are not known for their medical facilities. They have a shortage of doctors, they have a shortage of hospitals. If the disease requires a lot of hospitalization and such care, there will be a huge problem that India will not be able to deal with. Our lead editorial, in fact, is related to this. It is on the question of whether the Government of India should be opening up schools in the country or not. What our editorial does, it quotes a study from JAMA Pediatrics, which essentially says that children have a higher chance of spreading corona. That's point number one. Point number two, the New York Times reported that America found 97,000 school children which had the coronavirus in just the last 2 weeks. So at a time when India is the #1 leader when it comes to daily fresh infections, does it really want to be taking a chance with opening up schools? So perhaps the best option right now is to carry on with online classes. Perhaps for the senior classes, there could be some version of online and offline classes, with perhaps children coming in once or twice a week with appropriate social distancing being maintained. That's all we have time for. Thank you. Have a great day.